Welcome, action fans, and thanks for joining us for another edition of All 90s Action All the Time, as we continue this season's journey into the best and worst action films of 1994. I'm your host, Scott Murphy, and on today's show, we are looking at Highlander III, The Sorcerer, also known as Highlander III, The Final Dimension. Joining me to talk about this Battle of Immortals, unfortunately, is not my regular co host, Mr. Craig Jaheim, Michigan's number one Christopher Lambert fan. Unfortunately, he could not make it today because he is off trying to be the one. But joining me instead is Philadelphia's number one Christopher Lambert fan. It's the DTV Connoisseur himself. It's Mr. Matt Poirier.
Thanks for having me on. Yes, I think I feel like if I'm not Philadelphia's number one, I'm at least South Philadelphia's. I got to feel like I've got at least for that portion of the city, but I'm going to take it for the whole city just in case. So
just in case. All right. Okay. Well, I think you can. I think you can claim that crown. I think it's. Yeah. I'm sure it'll be fine. Yeah. Well, it's good to have you on the show again, Matt.
Yes. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk about this movie.
Yes. I don't know why I was just thinking about this, but because you come from Philadelphia, one time when you come on the show, I think I'm going to announce you as live from the ECW arena.
Yes.
For all the handful of wrestling fans who might listen to this podcast, who might get that 90s wrestling reference.
Yes. I think that still is there.
The ECW arena.
I don't think it's called the ECW.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not. I don't think it was called the ECW arena I think they just called it that when they were there. I think it was always not called that.
Okay, that's all right. Well, because I think there's a wrestling arena here in South Philadelphia that it has I'll see flyers sometimes for sort of off main circuit wrestling events here. So I think WrestleMania is actually going to happen at the main. I think it's actually going to be at the Lincoln Financial Field, the football field here in Philly. So they are having WrestleMania here this year. But I believe there's another arena that does kind of the smaller circuits here. And I think that used to be, I think it's the one that was the ECW arena.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I think it's still there.
Wait a second. Oh my. Oh, this is we're just going to include this in the recording. Craig has entered the room. So
there he is.
This is as exciting as podcasting gets. I've just announced that Craig can't be part of the recording, but actually he is. Let's hold on to your seats, everybody. The audio is just it's just coming through. The audio has not come up yet. I don't think you can hear it yet. Craig, can you hear us?
Hey, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Craig. We've just started the recording. I've just said that you're not going to be part of this episode, but we thought we would include this in the recording of you joining at the last second.
Yes, as I've been sitting with the Zoom host is in waiting room, waiting to connect for the past 33 minutes now, but our host is here waiting to connect, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay, we've had some technical issues we didn't know about. We thought Craig couldn't make it, but he can. He can make it, folks. And we're going to do the episode, all three of us. So ignore my earlier statement where I said I announced you as Michigan's number one Christopher Lambert fan, Craig. So
yeah. And so it would have been 400 years is a long time to hate. Oh, and you never wrote would be my opening if I was there for the official introduction.
Yes, that would have been great. But you still managed to get the line in, so it's still okay.
Yes.
And we're only like a couple of minutes into the record. We had and it's okay, Craig. You're safe now. We did have a brief tangent into wrestling, but it's gone now. It's past.
Okay.
So we can just talk Highlander.
Yes.
So I think this is a good time, since we've already been derailed, not once, or once by my kind of going on a wrestling tangent, and another time by Craig entering the recording as we've already started recording. So it's very exciting stuff.
From the dawn of time we came, moving silently among you, down through the centuries, immortals.
Down through the ages, he has traveled through time, fulfilling the legend that there can be only one. But now, there's another.
His name is Cain, the most feared and evil among us. Highlander's out there somewhere, and he owes me for all those years.
Two enemies from another time are about to collide in this one.
I'll see you in hell.
There can be only one.
Highlander III, the Sorcerer.
Highlander 3, The Sorcerer, also known as The Final Dimension, which was released on December 9th, 1994 in the UK, before opening in the States in January of 1995. It was directed by Andrew Morahan, who doesn't have an extensive feature film filmography, but has worked with a lot of artists, directing music videos. He's worked with the likes of George Michael, Paul McCartney, Van Halen, The Human League, Elton John, and is also a frequent collaborator, or was a frequent collaborator, with Guns N' Roses, and even directed the epic November Rain video. The story for Highlander 3 was written by Brad Merman, who I didn't find like tons of notable credits, but he was a writer for Body of Evidence and two other Christopher Lambert movies, Night Moves and Resurrection. The other person who wrote the story was William Panzer, who also has writing credits on Highlander 2, The Quickening, and Highlander Endgame, and is a producer on most of the Highlander stuff. The screenplay was written by Paul All, who again doesn't have an extensive writing credits on IMDb, but I did discover that he also wrote another Christopher Lambert movie in North Star, which is a Christopher Lambert James Caan Western. Apparently, the script had uncredited rewrites by Brad Merman and Rene Manzor, who has no other notable writing credits, but did direct some episodes of Young Indiana Jones, which some of you might remember. Some of you who remember the 90s might remember that show, Young Indiana Jones. Critically, it's currently sitting on a god-awful 4.4 out of 10 on IMDb, a possibly even worse 5% on Rotten Tomatoes based on 20 reviews, 28 on Metacritic based on 12 reviews, and a sad 2.2 on Letterboxd. Box office-wise, it made $36.7 million off of a budget that was estimated to be between $26 and $34 million. That said, both Box Office Mojo and the numbers actually said it made $13 million, but I'm imagining that that's just the North American gross, and Wikipedia includes the worldwide gross. But I couldn't find another site to verify the $36.7 million gross, other than the Wikipedia signing. So I'm not sure about that. But anyway, that is your stats for today. So we are here to talk about Highlander 3. So we usually at this point ask people whether they'd seen Highlander 3 before, any memories they have. We don't always ask them if they'd seen Highlander 3. We ask them just if we'd seen whatever movie we're covering. So and whatever memories they might hold of that particular film. So because you are the special guest, Matt, we will start with you. Have you seen Highlander 3? And any memories you might hold of the movie?
Yeah, so I was a big Highlander fan. I did see this in the theater, so I do remember going to the theater and seeing it. I was a little disappointed. I think one of the things is I didn't quite understand how probably enough about how movies worked at the time, and I was questioning why they didn't incorporate Duncan MacLeod. I was 15, so it's not like I was like really young, or 16, I guess. But I was really enjoying the Highlander the series at that time. It was really doing a lot of really cool things, and I was wondering why this didn't incorporate any of that. Of course, I know now that the show had really kind of just started when they were making this movie, so that made sense. But I think the other thing too is that I look at this movie as kind of like when you're playing basketball with your friends and you miss a shot and you're like, hey, can I do that over again? Can I get a do-over? That's what this is, right? Because this is essentially Highlander Part 2, but it's the do-over, right? That's what they should have called it, Highlander Part 2, the do-over. And I guess as a do-over, I think it's pretty good. If I was the teacher and I was going to give this person a second chance to write the paper, I'd give them a C on this after failing them miserably for Part 2, I think. So I have fun with this movie. It's an interesting film in the Highlander series. But again, it's this idea that like they just thought 2 was so bad. And the other thing too, of course, is just the fact that the first movie really wasn't made to have a sequel. So that the fact that we've got sequels of these just always is interesting as well.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. Like, it is very much like a standalone film, and like this, the Highlander franchise is like the exact opposite of the MCU. Like nothing knits together. The mythology's all over the place. There's a million plot holes. Like,
Right. I remember when the internet was kind of new at this time. A friend of mine whose dad was like who's kind of like the computer person in our town. He was the one who like did everybody all the companies' computer, all the businesses in towns. He did their computer stuff, and so he had the internet before a lot of us did. And I remember he found somebody on the World Wide Web who wrote a thesis that essentially knit all of the series together. Which, of course, I looked this up on Wikipedia and found out that they aren't supposed to be knit together. Like 3 is supposed to be a do-over, and Endgame is supposed to be an alternate timeline that's again supposed to take place after a different version of Part 1. So they aren't supposed to be knit together, but you're right. And the other thing too is that movies were meant to have sequels at this time. In the 80s, that's when really they I think 88, if you don't count Coming to America, 88 was the last time that the top 3 movies and that grossed for the year didn't have a sequel. And so not counting this year, of course, right? We don't have sequels yet for Barbie, Super Mario Brothers, or Oppenheimer, and probably not going to get one for Oppenheimer, I imagine. But we Coming to America, if you don't count that as having a sequel because it finally came out however many years ago, usually if movies did well, right, they made sequels. And I think this movie wasn't supposed to have a sequel. The people who made it didn't think, I'm sorry, at this one, the first movie, they weren't planning on a sequel for it, but then it just did really well. It kind of had this cult following after it was released in the theaters. And now it's like, oh, we've got to make a sequel. And it's like, but how? We finished it. We ended the movie. We ended the series with the first movie. And so this attempt at a better version of a sequel for a movie that wasn't supposed to have a sequel is I think a little fascinating for me.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. So Craig, have you seen the movie, and any memories? Same question.
Yes. So I think this was the first one I actually saw when my brother, he rented it on VHS. but all I remembered for the longest time was the final fight in the factory. And for some reason in my brain, as I was going to rewatch it for this, I assume I think I paired it with the second one where I was like, oh, so the second one's in the future, so this one is even further in the future because they must be linked somehow going in because that has to be the case. But it has been this obsession with me in the same way that Matt already talked about of like, I love Highlander 1. When I was growing up, it was probably one of my most watched movies. It's kind of one of those where I just throw on.
Mhm.
And I've always kind of tried to figure out the timeline in my head and just never could, and trying to make sense of it. And then, yeah, I went online finally to look it all up, and that basically every sequel afterwards is its own branch off from the original. But yeah, I actually I'm kind of weirdly in the same boat where it's this movie. It almost feels like, I guess, the new example, like now that people would know about nowadays, would be it feels like the Force Awakens of this, where it's like, oh, let's take all the best bits of Highlander, the original, and we'll just throw that in, and it's kind of the same plot. And we even have the car scene, but instead it's with his adopted son, or we have Mario Van Peebles is basically doing his best Clancy Brown impression. And it's like all this different stuff with it. But um, yeah, I'm in one of those. I'm also in the camp where I don't maybe because I watched it so much, don't mind the second one, the Renegade version, as much as people, because I know people despise it, but I don't mind it that much. If I can almost turn off my brain and think of it as not a Highlander movie in a weird like, if this wasn't in the Highlander movie, maybe I would enjoy it more. So I'll just kind of go with that. But again, Highlander 2 I haven't seen in well over a decade either. So, but yeah, it was fun. It was interesting. I still feel, as much as I love the series, that it probably just should have stayed at the first one. But it was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting franchise to cover. I mean, obviously, on this podcast, we can only actually cover the two films, Highlander 2 and 3. Um, but it's a fascinating franchise, and obviously, there's a TV show as well, as Matt mentioned, which is interesting in its own way. And yeah, it's a sprawling franchise. In fact, uh, I think maybe because of my age, I'm like slightly older than Craig and slightly younger than Matt. So I think my introduction of Highlander might have actually been the animated series from 1994. So, um, so like yeah, so it's a multifaceted franchise. There's many entry points you can possibly have into it.
Well, I have to ask you, as somebody from Scotland, like, what were your thoughts, at least watching the first Highlander movie, when you've got a Frenchman playing a Scotsman, and then a Scotsman playing an Egyptian named Ramirez? When you saw that, what were your thoughts?
Um, it I guess it kind of blew my mind a little bit. Like I was like, what is going on? Why is Sean Connery kind of like, why have they given him like a spray tan and pretending he's like Spanish Egyptian? And but it amuses me, like the fact that you've got like every time I watch a Highlander movie, which I genuinely love as a movie, I like Craig, is one of those ones that was a real favorite. And in terms of like 80s action movies that I really love, I would rank Highlander in the same way that I would rank Flash Gordon. They're both movies that people generally see as guilty pleasures, but I will defend to the hilt as being genuinely great movies. But to answer your question, um, it makes me laugh every time. Every time Christopher Lambert says, "I am Connor McLeod," and also every time Sean Connery goes, "I'm Ramirez," and you're like, "Are you really?" I'm not entirely convinced, Sir Sean. But, so like it just always made me laugh. I think that was just my reaction of like this. This movie is kind of ridiculous, and that almost adds to the enjoyment. Just how ridiculous that is. I think like that's the most far fetched. It's even more like in terms of Sean Connery's career, it's even more far fetched than when he's like in Hunt for the Red October and he's supposed to be like Lithuanian or whatever, and he's still like, yes, steal that submarine. Lithuanian. Okay.
Yeah, no, I can totally say you when you talk about the people defending Highlander, this is always brings to mind like I almost I was talking about Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I was kind of talking about like previous comic book iterations and the old Batman that came out in the 60s and how we look at that as kind of campy, but at the time for like World War II generation and like early silent generation people, they grew up with like these really cheesy serials. When they go to the movie theater, you'd have these melodramatic serials, and how that old Batman mocked those. And the people that were greenlighting the Batman show, they didn't like it, and they were like, well, we already invested so much money, so we just got to let it go. And they weren't expecting it to be successful, but it was. I kind of feel like Highlander has a similar kind of Gen X exennial quality to it, that like if you were someone who was like maybe like a boomer and you were looking at that movie, you'd be like, why would anybody like this? Like, because all the things that we say that are wrong. But it's like a 90-minute, 100-minute rock video that's just all kinds of cool, and the whole concept is cool. And so it's like for us that it just seems to work so well. And like I agree with you about like defending that movie to the death, because there's so many good things about it that just like, yeah, like you said, it feels like a guilty pleasure, but there's so much that works for our age cohort. I think that that it's just sort of there that not everybody gets it, I think.
But I would even say that, no, I agree completely, Matt, in that, yeah, because not only it's like it has a soundtrack by Queen, and even on top of that, beyond the guilty pleasure, is that it has these moments. The first one, obviously, it has these moments of amazing like cinematography that goes like that whole stadium scene where it's that long dolly shot and it's all this stuff where it's just and I'm pretty sure in my brain I remember this as being the first time, and that's how it's how I always associate movie sex now, is that movie. And I know they basically do it in every Highlander where it's like, oh, okay, so that's a Hollywood movie sex scene, is that it's two people each other, like caressing each other, and he like licks her boob and stuff. That's a movie. That's like how people have sex, apparently, and that's.
Well, I think definitely later on in this episode, we definitely need to talk about the sex scene that happens later on in this film, because it's quite funny.
Yeah, it's interesting because you've got Deborah Kara Unger, who she does Crash, not long after this. I think it was like 96. So she has her share of interesting love scenes with interesting actors in the early stages of her career, for sure. So yeah.
Yeah. And the kind of interesting thing is apparently she did that. Apparently, according to the IMDb trivia anyway, she refused a body double. So that's all Deborah Kara Unger in there.
Yeah, and I think she said she just went for it. Like she said, her and Lambert talked about it, and they were like, "Let's just do it. Let's just go for it." And yeah, and I mean, again, she does Crash. That's her next movie is Crash, and I think she doesn't do a double with those scenes either, when she's with James Spader and Elias Koteas.
Yeah, which I mean, it's a pretty daring move for like a young actress, at that kind of stage in her career. But it's sometimes I think she managed to avoid it, but like sometimes you can get kind of pigeonholed for doing certain things, like your own nudity.
I mean, helped her in that sense is that it wasn't like a gratuitous or like a slasher, with something like that, where it was like clearly the art house version of it.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. It's not like a kind of as much as I love, like those kind of scream queen actresses, in a lot of those kind of 80s horrors. It's not like a kind of Linnea Quigley, Brinke Stevens kind of situation, like where they're kind of like that's generally what they're hired for, and that's no knock on Linnea Quigley or Brinke Stevens or Michelle Bauer or any of those actresses. They're kind of tend to be hired for their roles. It's just the way the kind of industry works.
Yeah.
So I guess like we should now kind of dive in to Highlander 3. Now we kind of dance about a bit more on the podcast. We did used to have like a more rigid structure of following the kind of plot quite rigidly. But we don't do that so much now. But we do kind of do it broadly chronologically. So let's kind of talk about the opening of the film. We meet back up with Gunnar McLeod, who tells us a little bit about how he ended up in Japan, and then we get like, what did you think of this like title, this kind of opening credit sequence where we have this sword making scene that seems to go on forever? That was I the only one that was like, God, this scene is long.
I think my first reaction, it goes on forever, but then I was also baffled because in my brain, I was like, wait a minute, no, he gets the sword from Ramirez. What's going on? Like, it just was like misfiring in my head. Like, no, he can't do that. He gets the sword because Ramirez dies, and like all this stuff. And then, yeah, it goes on for a while. But there's a bunch of scenes in this where it feels like they go on longer than they should. 98-minute movie.
That is true. That is true. There does seem to be like a surprising amount of padding given the runtime of the movie. So then we are introduced to the sorcerer Nakano, who is played by Mako, essentially being the same character that he was in Conan the Barbarian.
Right.
So not only are we remaking the first Highlander, we're introducing other characters from other movies.
Right. It's like Han in the Fast and Furious movies, right? He's technically from another movie that Justin Lin did with Sung Kang. They just brought him into the Fast and Furious movies and said, "Yep, there he is." So, yeah.
And he Nakano gives a speech about Kane, a very similar speech that Ramirez gives about the Kurgan, and like basically how evil and badass and how terrible for the world it'd be if Kane wins the prize. And then we're introduced to Kane, and he, just to prove he's evil, I've written down here, Kane burns down village just to prove he's evil, and I've put evil in all capital letters because that's where we're going with this. And like, I love how they really lean into that, where they're like, well, just in case you weren't sure if he was evil, and we're going to have him burn down a village, and then while it burns, we're going to have him maniacally laughing the whole time before riding off. Just so you know for sure, you have no doubts. This is our bad guy.
And have him, I'm sure it was Mario's character choice, but every scene have him do like a tongue flick thing. Which is just to make him gross too, or whatever they try and do because his teeth are black and whatever.
Yes, apparently can't find a good dentist in 16th century Japan. It's hard. I also like that, in terms of like action movie tropes, we're kind of only like 15 minutes in, and we immediately get a training montage, with
Yep.
with Nakano and Connor, which is an alright training montage. What do people think of this?
It. You could go first, man.
Oh, well, yeah, I think it was exactly kind of what you're saying is that like I'm usually expecting that to come later in the film, and the fact that they put one in now, yeah, it lets you know that they're going to move this thing along as quickly as they can, I guess. But yeah, it was a very interesting thing. They also jammed a lot of Chekhov's whatevers into that, right? Like
Mhm.
Chekhov's, all kinds of things that like you. It's like one of those things like you've got to sort of like almost like you've got to like get a satchel or something, just gather all of this stuff up and put it in this bag and keep it because in the last 20 minutes or so, all this stuff is going to start coming out of this bag. And, hey, remember this from the first 5 minute montage and remember this from the montage. And so, yeah, it was a very, very kind of interesting deal. But, I prefer a montage to move things along early in the film than too much, backsell or something like that.
Sure. And
Yeah.
Craig, did you have a point on the training montage as well?
No, I feel similar. I think it was another one of those. Yeah, it definitely brings up, the Chekhov's gun, where I was like, oh, okay, so he's doing that kind of sword twist where he gets the sword that's gonna pop up, and because they also replay it and then even go into what they use, like the negative footage aspect, and they just repeat it several times. It's like, okay, yep, okay, so that's gonna probably pop up, I'm assuming, and then I don't. There was so many points where I guess part of me just I had to keep trying to turn my brain off to the first one of, and being like, "But, okay, so I know the whole first movie has a big training montage sequence, so he's already supposed to be a well-versed swordsman by this point, but okay, yeah, yep, let's just keep going with it. At least it's happening earlier, yeah,
Yeah.
and we could get
He does
stuff."
seem to have in his early training with Nakano. He does seem to have regressed a bit from where he was at, just after Ramirez's death in the first one.
What what's weird is because with Ramirez, uh, going into all the technical aspects of, like, with when Ramirez dies, then he still spends, like, all the rest of his first wife, Heather's life, like, until she dies of old age, is what it makes it seem in the original, but this is kind of where they kind of start deviating somewhat or being like, "Oh, don't remember it fully." Like, just kind of remember these bits and pieces of the first movie. And then,
Yeah.
but not the
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess like we missed like the deleted scenes where he like leaves Heather and says like, "Bye, I'm just going to Japan for 3 months," and then like. And then presumably after he escapes from the cave, like he presumably goes back to Scotland and spends the rest of Heather's life with Heather in in their little cottage that they had in the first movie. We're trying too much to make it make sense. It
No,
clearly
I think
doesn't.
it's
But yeah.
I think it is actually that it happens after she dies, and
Oh, okay.
they make her life like they kind of like they. It's one of those things where like they don't expect us to think like, that's interesting that she lived until old age, and then he was able to get to Japan with not that much time to do all of this stuff. Like it was almost like because I think maybe they didn't do the math is what it is. I
Yeah.
think they wrote the scene and just didn't bother doing the math, and so it's another one of those quirks of the Highlander timeline. But this one's like within the movie. It's like because remember at the end they have the montage where he goes back to Scotland and we start to see him living with her into old age, and so um, yeah, so I
That's
think they
true.
just didn't do the math. Yeah, I think they didn't
Okay.
do the math on it. Or maybe when they did do the math, they were like, God, we got all this great stuff in here. We just we maybe somebody at the end caught it and was like, you didn't do the math on that. And he's like, but forget it. It's too late. We gotta go. We gotta go with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say as well, like, obviously this all happens in this training montage, and then Nakano is sadly killed by Kane, And it's this kind of thing of like, because it's so closely fused to the story beats of the original, um, you can't help but compare it. Sometimes, people always say like can't compare sequels to the original, da 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 da. But because it's so close, its DNA is so close to the original, it's very hard not to do that. So I don't know what you felt about like the Nakano character. I like the Nakano character. Mako is a fun actor. But it's just because he's clearly the Ramirez surrogate, and we just don't get enough. We just don't get the same amount of time with him. The character isn't as well kind of developed as the Ramirez character. It just doesn't pop in the same way. And so I guess I was wondering for both you guys whether you would like more of the Nakano character, or you feel that that's enough of the Nakano character. What your feelings was there?
I mean, I'm in the boat. Yeah, where it's at now, I would say either more or it's in a weird position where
Mm-hmm.
it either feels like they should have beefed that part up more in order for us to really care more. Like when again, trying not to talk about the first one, but it's inevitable with this one.
It really is.
Because you actually you kind of feel something when, or at least feel that McLeod feels something when Ramirez is killed. So yeah, almost adding it more or just of getting rid of the character, or just like giving him a little amount to kind of just move the plot forward. I don't know, but the way it was now, it did feel strange. And then, as you already have been talking about, Scott, it becomes so hard to not make a comparison to everything.
Yeah, and I think because of what you're saying, Craig, which I agree with, like the Nakano death just isn't as impactful as the Ramirez death, which you really feel in the first one.
Well, and then it goes by really quick because you hear Kane makes a reference that Nakano is like they fought before, and Nakano basically won in a way. Where then this version, he gets stabbed in the stomach really quick and then killed almost. It's a very quick fight scene.
Yeah, I think what did you think of that, Matt? Because I felt the same as Craig. I felt like the fight scene was almost too quick. Like Kane dispatched with him pretty easily, even though Nakano had like a couple of tricks up his sleeve, and presumably his final trick was that he caused. I don't know how he caused the quickening to happen in such a way that it trapped Kane in the cave for 400 years, but it seems like that's what we're supposed to believe, that like that was like his last magic trick. But still, I feel like it should have been a bigger battle than it was.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, right? Is that they were stuck in this again, the first movie boxed them in terms of how do you make a sequel. I had heard that there was an original idea for a sequel that would have been a prequel, which I think would have been a better idea, but they didn't do a lot of prequels back then. So they had to come up with an idea of how do you extend, come up with a sequel that isn't Highlander 2. And they're like, oh, well, maybe if an immortal is trapped, right, and then comes to the surface, they're somehow unearthed. Now he has to battle that person. That's the idea. So it's almost like Nakano was just an agent to get Mario Van Peebles trapped so that he could be the villain for the whole movie. And they just kind of wrote it as a kind of a throwaway thing. But you're right that if he's the surrogate for Ramirez, right? Ramirez was somebody that we had this whole story based around, that we could really, appreciate him. Whereas with Nakano, I almost feel like we weren't supposed to feel anything for Nakano. We weren't supposed to care, because the whole point was supposed to be that he's trapping. The whole point was that Mario Van Peebles and his two partners get trapped, and that's really the more important thing. But I think there's too much going on here with this, where it's just like after all of the zags they did with part 2 that people didn't care for and didn't like, it's almost like they played this one too safe. And the Nakano character is another example of that, where it's almost like they just pulled him from another sword and sandal, series, and the idea of almost like playing this like it's a modern sword and sandal, in that way, and just pull Mako from the Conan, Conan the Barbarian movies and have him in this. So I don't think we were supposed to care about Nakano. We're supposed to think that Kane is a real baddie, and that our hero is going to vanquish him in 400 years from now after the archaeologists unearth him.
Hmm. Also, the other thing I would absolutely, I can kind of see where you're coming from there, Matt, for sure. And maybe you're right. Maybe the Nakano character is not the Ramirez surrogate. Really, he is literally just a plot device so we can get this Kane character stuck for 400 years. However, I did wonder, because like I know the mythology of this franchise is all over the place, but so if the prize is like you get like all the knowledge in the universe, surely the prize would know that there was an immortal stuck in a cave, and so wouldn't the prize? So Connor wouldn't have won the prize in the first movie.
Well, so that is what I've been trying to forget while watching it, but also couldn't. It wouldn't leave my brain of like, but the end of the first movie, he obviously feels different, and I feel like as an immortal or whatever he is by this point, he would have. And when the Kurgan dies, Clancy Brown, like it is a different quickening. And
Yes.
so another one of those moments where again it's like, oh no, forget about just forget that part of the movie. Just remember like the main bits, the remember when Queen's Princes of the Universe was playing and they were just fighting? Just remember that.
Right.
Or whatever.
Well, because that's what the series is as well, right? Because the series, they're pretty blatant about the fact in the series that yes, Connor McLeod defeats the Kurgan, but there are still plenty of immortals left in 1985, and you're just supposed to just go with that. And I mean, the series is good enough that I'm okay to go with it. I mean, that's kind of the funny thing, right? That nowadays canon is such a huge thing, right? That like things have got to fit and they've all got to work together. And I remember seeing people debate when Mindy Kaling was putting out her Velma show, that people were like, well, where is it canonically in Scooby-Doo that Velma is a lesbian? And I'm like, there is no Scooby-Doo canon, right? Like Hanna-Barbera, as far as they were concerned, Velma could be an alien from Velmastan who was sent to Earth to help the mystery gang solve mysteries, right? Like, and Hanna-Barbera didn't care about that kind of thing. And I think Highlander is kind of the same thing, where with Highlander, the creators just wanted to make one movie, and suddenly it was like, well, no, we got to have sequels. And at that time, sequels didn't, canon and sequels they weren't the same thing. But now it's kind of it's like one of those things where we're watching it and we're like, yeah, how does that all fit together? And they were just kind of like, no, we're Hanna-Barbera, and we're just putting Batman and Robin in our Scooby-Doo, and you're going to enjoy it, and that's that kind of thing. And it's almost kind of how they were doing it. They were which is kind of funny and kind of almost chaos in this world where you've got like Vin Diesel going and retconning all of his old movies to put them all in the Fast and Furious universe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So everything now connects, and like even like weird, even the movies of other people, like for some reason connect to the Fast and the Furious universe. Because like I remember watching like Hobbs and Shaw, and they made like Jason Statham's character, like he has like a garage, and it includes like one of the minis from the Italian Job, and I'm like, what? Now the Italian Job remake is now part of the Fast and the Furious universe. What is going on? I don't like. Yeah, canon has become like this massive thing. I guess like, it's weird that it's weird that comic book culture has like invaded all of popular culture now, to the extent that canon used to just be like a kind of mainly a kind of comic book thing, like Marvel and DC, and even then it could sometimes be woolly, but like but now it seems to be everything, whereas before nobody seemed to care. Certainly, executives didn't seem to care previously, up until the last kind of 15, 20 years, really.
Well, you can make the case of this is probably the best example of that, where the executives were just like, no, we're making a sequel. And there's like, but this wasn't made to have a sequel. You know, there's no ambiguity at the end of this movie. There's no cliffhanger. There's no like room for a sequel. But they're like, well, no, it needs to have a sequel. The first one, you know, picked up an audience. So, you know, anytime in the 80s and into the 90s when movies were good, they made sequels. They didn't care if they, you know, what they had to do. I think nowadays, what's the big one? The one in England, the Rise of the Foot Soldier, where they just have to keep making prequels. And so it's like Craig Fairbrass is like in his 50s and he's playing someone in his younger and younger in each movie as he's getting older and older, because they you know, all the characters die off in that infamous massacre. And so they just keep making prequels as the cast gets older. But it's kind of like almost like the reverse of the Highlander, where they just keep making sequels and trying to make them fit with a movie that wasn't supposed to have a sequel.
Yeah, that is quite crazy. I don't think I've actually watched any of those, but like they're their own kind of mini subculture of like kind of geezer flicks, you know, like some of which I enjoy, but like a lot of which I find not so good, not so good, for various reasons.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I watched one of them because Will from Exploding Helicopter was on. We watched the third one with Craig Fairbrass, and it was a trip having to try to, in my head, say this 50-year-old Craig Fairbrass is supposed to be in his 20s, and you just sort of stretch that credulity like that, just like what we're doing here with this, where we're saying like, oh, you know, he got all the knowledge in the world and somehow didn't know that there were 3 immortals buried in a cave in Japan somewhere.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. It is always funny when you get like you get an actor playing like just ridiculously younger than they are. Again, like for some reason we've ended back up at Hobbs and Shaw again, but it's just a good example of this, of like we have Jason Statham and Vanessa Kirby being brother and sister, and not like step brother and sister, like actual brother and sister, because like there's a flashback to them as kids, but Jason Statham in real life is like 20 years older than Vanessa Kirby.
Right. She's playing someone older, and he's playing someone younger. Like I think they're supposed to be like our age, or they're supposed to be like they think that they're supposed to have grown up in the 80s, and of course she wouldn't have been born yet, and he would have been a teenager. And they just it's funny because like they're so keen on some. It's funny how with the Fast Furious, how they're so keen on certain points, but other times they're just like, yeah, of course they're siblings, or yeah, of course there's a car in space, or yeah, of course, you know, somebody's jumping off a van that's falling off a cliff and, you know, running up the van, and it's perfectly fine. It's interesting how that is, but we've got to somehow retcon this story to make it canon.
Yeah, it's nuts. Yes, Kirk.
I will bring up the I guess sidetracking a little bit. This is probably one of many episodes where somehow we've talked about Hobbs and Shaw.
Yeah, I do feel like it's come up a bunch for some reason. I don't know why. It's not even a great movie. It's not a terrible movie. It's like a 6 out of 10. But like it's I don't know why Hobbs and Shaw has come up so much. But anyway, we'll cut back to Highlander 3. So one of the things that entertained me about this movie is we're kind of fast forward a bit. There is a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of actually rather boring scenes where we get introduced to Alex, Deborah Kara Unger's character. She's at an archaeological site. Not a lot happens in these scenes. They drag on a bit. No fault of Deborah Kara Unger, who is perfectly fine in her role. But they kind of. I feel like a lot of those kind of scenes kind of drag on. But I did notice as well that we're now in 1994. So we're a bit into the 90s. But apparently we're still doing the classic kind of New York as a crime-ridden hellhole kind of trope, because like Connor is back in New York for all of 2 seconds and is immediately mugged by a Latino gang
Well, we should bring up too the very important plot point of this whole movie that is brought up very frequently throughout it, and is important, is that Connor has a adopted son
That is
that
true
pops
in Morocco. Yes, that's a fair point. Yeah.
does not have any sort of significance again until the very end.
Right, he just disappears. It's just sort of like, somebody take care of him. It's like, yeah, it's the idea of it is just like, hey, just take care of him, and then we'll bring him in at the end. It is a fascinating thing that like he just is just gone like that. Yeah, it is very interesting.
I think it's interesting as well because like it's a weird relationship. Like they kind of make it that when Connor leaves Morocco to go back to New York, that the kid is broken up about it. In terms of like the dialogue of like, oh no, I'm gonna miss you, but like in terms of like the kid's like facial reactions, doesn't look like he really cares that much, to be honest. It's
Yeah.
I don't know, like it just there was never much chemistry between this child actor and Christopher Lambert. You never thought like, oh, that's a sweet father son relationship. You're just like, Connor hangs out with this kid, I guess. Like I'd say that, like I don't know, like maybe am I being harsh? Tell me if I'm being harsh. Either of you, Matt, Craig.
I don't think so. No, it feels kind of strange and just added in because they were like, oh well, he can't save the woman at the very end because that would just be too much like the original.
Mm-hmm.
And then it even connects to, like, it makes it seem like this is the significant thing of him adopting this son, and this must be the first time it's happened. But again, the recurring thing that we'll have to talk about the original, that is like his assistant in the original is this girl he adopted and raised when he saved from the Nazis or whatever.
That is true, but like in in favor of the film, I will say this: not everybody might know that because in the original American cut of the first Highlander, the World War II scene where he like saves her from a Nazi is not in the movie. So it's not clear in the original American cut that she is kind of like his adopted daughter. It's just like they have a weird close relationship. I think like in most of the VHS releases and things that came subsequently after, I guess probably did have that scene. I don't know when it was put back in to all versions. I'm not sure. So there is a possibility that an American audience might not be aware of that from the first film. But it was in the European cut of the film, so any European fans of the film would definitely know that he has already adopted somebody because the secretary in the first movie is like his adopted daughter who he saves from the Nazis in World War II. So yeah.
And I think one of the things too is they kind of, it almost feels like a throwaway line. The love interest in the first movie, they kind of like, oh well, she dies in a car accident, and it's not even told from him, it's told from the detective that's like investigating him. And like that's just how they kind of get rid of that element so that he can, get with the new woman who is a reincarnation potentially of his old love after.
I'm not sure that she's a reincarnation. I think she's just a direct descendant of. Or I don't know, like Matt, what did you think? Did you think she was descendant or reincarnation?
So initially, I thought she just happened to look the same, and it's just sort of like if you've lived for 400 years, you see people that look like people you knew, and that was the idea. But no, I think you're right that she is a descendant because I think something comes up about her last name. I think, and that's that, which is interesting that she would have that she would just have been over 400 years, right? Would have just happened to be able to run the lineage that she would have gotten the last name, that she would have been descendant of males throughout that lineage. Just happened to be to have the last name, but I think something comes up about the last name if I remember correctly.
I think you're right. I think that's why I assumed descendant rather than reincarnation. Yeah, I think you're right. Yes, because it's not quite 400 years because we're like in those flashbacks we're in revolutionary France, so we're in the 18th century, but it's still like 300 years. Um, so yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess it's not that inconceivable, right? Because if you think about like 300 years, like how many generations that would be, like it might be like 9 maybe, that
Yeah, I guess
from
so.
fathers that she would have been descended from, that she would have gotten the last name. So it's not, I guess it's not so crazy.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I did like I don't know why I noticed this, but uh like it's just like a random detail that when he goes back to New York to be Russell Nash, he like he like wears like the same jacket he wore in the original, and I was like, is that like his New York only jacket? It's like every time he goes to New York, he has to wear that kind of Mac, you know. Did anybody else find that funny?
Yes. I really think it was this movie trying to play it as safe as possible. Like
Yeah,
they were so worried about how much the first movie deviated from, or sorry, how much the second movie
second movie.
deviated from the first movie, that they wanted to weave themselves so much into it that it was almost like this old sketch on Conan O'Brien, the ghosts of recent past, where because it was like he did this thing where it was like other ghosts from A Christmas Carol, and so
Ah,
it was all kind of
yes.
different ghosts. And one of them was like the ghost who works out in his basement, and he's like working out. And then the ghost of recent past, he's showing them something from 5 minutes before, and it's the guy working out in his basement. He's like, "Oh, remember this?" And I kind of felt like a lot of that in the movie. It was just like, "Remember this from the first one? Remember this from the first one?" And it's like, I do remember that. And I almost kind of feel like because of the reception to the second one, that people watching this in '94, I don't think that as many people as they thought were going to be watching this in '94 and being
Mm,
like, oh, this feels like a nice warm blanket of just like comfort covering me. I think they were probably watching it being like, okay, you're just reusing stuff from the first movie. Again, for me, kind of coming at it like, yeah, wow, almost 30 years later, because I really haven't seen it, I don't think, since I watched it in the theater. That watching it now, it feels a lot different, but I think at that time, I think they were trying to play it as safe as possible, whereas the one before it was, they were kind of doing all kinds of different stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I know, I think setting up for this recording, as reading up where, um, this one was supposed to, it was really designed, I think, to help promote um, the TV series as well. And I know it did. Like, it gained a lot of view, even though it didn't get good reviews. Overall, it at least gave a lot of publicity to the series. I
so
But yes, I think that, yeah, it was very much connected to, as Matt said many times, like the warm blanket. It
mhm.
does feel like, kind of remember how great the original was, but also, hey, I'll look at this new series, or the series that's, kind of starting out, that's also a throwback to Highlander, the first one, and yeah.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
bring it, and I think that's like a great point you bring up of the TV series, which is I think is what makes this one seem a little bit like over the top and not quite work as much as that, you know, Mario Van Peebles' villain is just so ridiculous compared to the villains that we get in Highlander the series, where you've got, Roland Gift as Xavier St. Cloud, you've got the Grayson as the villain, but also even when you have some more over the top ones like Martin Mull um, Richard Mull. No, I don't know, yeah, Richard Mull, not Martin Mull, not Martin Mull. Bull from Night Court. But you also get like Roddy Piper, but like Xavier St. Cloud as a villain, Roland Gift, he was fantastic. Also you're getting these additional characters, like you've got, Elizabeth Grayson, and you got Roger Daltrey. So the series was really hitting its stride, and then you get this thing that just seems like it's completely out in left field. There are no villains that look like Mario Van Peebles with the hair and the piercings and like the tongue, like, all that kind of stuff. Like the villains that you get in this are like these, like sort of like these sophisticated, like, I don't know, they're drinking their wine and getting ready to murder somebody. Grayson was another villain I thought was another great one. Then you get Mythos and all. But it's interesting thinking about that this was trying to sell the TV series when the TV series was doing a better job of some of these things than the movie was doing.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about something else, but I may as well ask you about since you bring up the villains, I'll ask you both about Kane and what you think about Kane, played by Mario Van Peebles, who apparently got this job because Christopher Lambert enjoyed working with him so much on Gunman, which me and Craig covered for last April's Christopher Lambert episode.
I made the mistake, I guess, going in right before watching it last night to kind of recap of like going through ranking systems or whatever of what people put on Highlander. And the Mario one, they actually, for Highlander fans, it's one of the better, well, I guess in quotes, better movies out of what's offered besides like Endgame or something. But I just couldn't really get behind Mario Van Peebles in the same way. I know what Matt was saying. It just felt so over the top in terms of, it felt like, at least with Clancy Brown as the villain in the first one, like it's over the top, but then there's something that is grounded with it, but he's also of a different, I don't know, it's more of like this punk rock vibe in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Maybe that matches with the 80s, where with this one it just feels like it's not turned up to 11, but without the scariness that came with Clancy Brown, or because also he's been concealed for 400 years and he pops up and then for some reason he knows how to work a phone or do all this other stuff like instantly.
I did laugh at that. Yeah. So like for some reason he knows it's been 400 years. He knows they're now in the 1990s. He knows how to use some modern technologies. Like he immediately knows how to use a phone and a car and stuff like this. But because we need some comic relief in the movie, he doesn't know how to use a condom. He thinks it's something, like, I just like, there's just, it's very random what he knows and he doesn't know, given whatever the plot convenience is.
Which is funny because a condom is probably the oldest bit of the of inventions or whatever out of everything else he knows how to use.
And probably the most intuitive as well. Like I was thinking about with the car, like someone who had never been in a car before could probably drive it as poorly as he drove it poorly. But how would you know how to start it? Right? Like there's nothing intuitive about how to start a car. Like he would be sitting there like banging on the steering wheel, being like, how does this thing start? And granted, I'm trying to figure out how a guy who was entombed for 400 years, an immortal who was entombed for 400 years, who somehow made it to New York, would have an issue driving the car. But it is, it's not so much that I'm saying it stretches credulity. I feel like there would have been more fun moments, right? Like, like him, like trying to make somebody show him how to start the car or something like that. Like there are more things they could have put in the movie to kind of have more fun with those kinds of things.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, for sure. And I do think, like, I mean, as we've discussed many, many times on this podcast, I am a fan of like a turn it up to 11 villain, whether that be Tommy Lee Jones in Under Siege, or like John Malkovich in Con Air, or whatever it be. Like we've discussed before. Usually I much enjoy that, but like I don't know, like Mario Van Peebles is not as good an actor as those two previous actors I mentioned. No offense, Mario, but you're not. I don't know. I like maybe it does feel a little too over the top, even for like a movie like Highlander. Because I do agree with you, Craig, when you say that like the Kurgan is very, very over the top. Clancy Brown is very, very over the top. But he is there is goofy and ridiculous parts about him, but there is still like a core there that is like quite intimidating, quite scary and whatever. Whereas like Mario Van Peebles' Kane character does feel more like a kind of Power Rangers villain than like a kind of villain that's like supposed to be intimidating or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I think that as Matt was saying, like they found more moment. It's like his character almost would have worked better if they tried to take it less serious
Mhm.
and go all out with like kind of this wacky element. But then it feels like somewhere along the line they went, "Oh well, this is a Highlander movie, so we probably should make it more serious." But somehow he didn't get the memo on it or something
Yeah.
because yeah, I think it would have worked better if there were those moments of the car, like trying to figure it out. But again, yeah, with the Kurgan, I mean, you have these moments where like he's doing the yell or they're doing the car bit of driving head on through into traffic or whatever he does. But then also there's like the scene early on that I mean, I think in the director's cut it's more obvious, but in the theatrical cut, it's the implied that he rapes, or Heather, or McLeod's first wife. There's like
Yeah,
all
right.
these dark undertones. Where with this one, it doesn't. I guess we're not provided with as much besides the sex scene, but that's later on in the movie with him and the sex
The
worker.
the him and the with the yeah, because that's not long after he comes to New York, and yeah, I guess like that is somewhat implied there that like a kind of sexual assault, um, but I don't know, like yeah, it's kind of hard to take anything he does kind of seriously, and I guess like he's doing he's doing a kind of quote unquote intimidating voice, which I think is kind of imitating the kind of graveliness of Clancy Brown. But like it just doesn't seem to be. I think like that. I mean, the crux of the problems with the movie is that everything seems like a kind of subversion of like things from the original. Kane is a sub Kurgan, Nakano is a sub Ramirez. Like we don't have we have like a rock score, but it's much more generic than the Queen score in the original. There's all these, and even they're also like I think that the in terms of another thing that kind of comes from the original, the kind of detective investigation subplot, I don't think works in this movie. Obviously, in the original, it's kind of key to the movie because it happens right from early on in the movie, and also like the police investigation is our way to bring Brenda into the movie, whereas in this movie Alex is brought in separately with this archaeological stuff, and so like we're just again, it's like what you were saying, Matt, about the Conan O'Brien thing, the remember this thing. It's just like, oh, remember there was a police investigation in the first movie? Yeah, I remember it. Like, but that seemed like integral to the plot of that first movie because, like, that was almost half it was a good section of the plot. Obviously we have the stuff, the flashbacks in the past, and Ramirez and Heather and all that, but like the future the present is mainly like that police investigation stuff, and also like the Kurgan trying to catch up with them. So I felt like it was unnecessary here. Matt, what were your thoughts on that kind of subplot?
Yeah, it was another one of those like, "Hey, remember this from the first movie," kind of things. It was just sort of like it was there just to be there. I do kind of wonder though, with the way that they create, I mean, I don't know. I feel like there's almost a sense with this one, like with the way they were using the detective and stuff, that like, you know, he was going to come back and get him sometime, that like there was going to be another movie where he does the investigation. But I guess the other piece of it, right, is that the detective's there to create these sort of like these roadblocks that keep Connor from achieving his goal, right? Like, you know, for example, what, you know, the way that Kane is able to kidnap his son is by the the detective arresting him, right? That and then it's like he's interrogating him, and he's like, well, he doesn't have enough to keep him, so he's going to let him go. And so it's really just a matter of being able to separate Connor from his son so that he can be a hostage. And again, we were talking about the son. The son seems to only be in the movie so that he can be a hostage at the end of the film. That seems to be his only purpose. So it's like the detective's only purpose is to remind us that he was in the movie before, and to have a few points in the film where he can prevent Connor from achieving his goals sooner. To just give us, you know, just add some roadblocks to make his life a little bit more difficult, to make us feel like we don't have enough tension. Which, to be honest, I don't know that I necessarily even needed it. You know, I could have done with more Lorena McKenna singing and, you know, montages of the Scottish Highlands and eliminated some of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I could see that, and I would definitely agree with all that. That you know, it's weird that there's some things like we kind of talked about at the start, with the relationship with Nakano. Like, if you know, they could have either minimized that completely, or they could you know, kind of filled that out a bit. And it is interesting that despite the fact that we have like a relatively decent amount of padding here, that they expand things, certain things, in a way that is feels unnecessary, and yet they abbreviate other things that feel like, well, this could have made the film better, you know, kind of taking it to the next level. And also, like, again, I feel like they're just trying to every corner. They're trying to replicate the magic of the original, and even like having the director be from a music video background. Again, I think like Andrew Morahan directs this film fine. I think like it's like a decent looking film, and we'll get on to, well, very soon we'll get on to one of the highlights of the film. But again, I do think that like he is not quite it's as much as Russell McKay has certain flaws in his filmmaking. He's not quite the visual stylist par excellence that Russell McKay is. Craig,
No, I mean, I agree with that. I think also, weirdly, none of the, like, obviously I know the ending going into it, but none of this, it doesn't feel like there's really much stakes there, even in how it's presented. Like when his son John is kidnapped and he's under investigation, he's Lambert is almost still kind of playful, or it's not like he's frantic about the fact that his son is being captured by, you know, this apparently horrible killer that's supposed to be worse than the Kurgan and so on. I didn't really feel, you know, anything. I was like, oh yeah, he's gonna get him, and McLeod knows he's gonna save the day. Like, that's how it all feels. But um, yeah, I even think I could have I would have been okay with more flashbacks that were meaningful, because even the French Revolution stuff, which is supposed to show you his connection to the woman that Sarah, who looks like Alex, like, it didn't really seem to move anything besides, but you also get that with him being shot, where he's shot by the gangster or the gang members, and then he's taken to the hospital, but then they realize there's no wounds, so he's just taken to the psychiatric ward. And kind of watching it, I was like, oh, this, you could just cut this whole thing out there, because he gets in there and then he instantly escapes, basically.
yeah, I kind of thought the same thing as well. Like, you either you either have that in the movie, and make it a thing. Like that could have been, like it, if you wanted to, that could have been like the second act of the film. That he like, he can't escape from this mental ward. He's trapped there, and it's all about like him escaping. Or you could have had like fun scenes of him trying to convince psychiatrists that he is actually an immortal, or whatever it is. But we just have him thrown in there, and then he's quickly he quickly escapes, aided by this guy who happens to think he is Napoleon. Before I cut over to Craig, I feel like you wanted to make a point, Matt. Yeah.
Oh, no, but I could. I mean, I think the one thing I think about this, all of this stuff, is it's like you said, it's like they include stuff, and it's like it's either why did you include it, right? Maybe you didn't need to include it, or if you're going to include it, why didn't you do more with it? And it does feel like there's a lot of that going on with this movie. And I think that the mental ward thing. I mean, it's just like it doesn't even make any sense. Like I don't even know what hospitals have a basement place that they put patients that like none of that even makes any sense. It works like in a music video, but doesn't kind of make that sense. But one quick thing about the director, according to the trivia, I don't know how true this is, but the director worked a lot with Guns N' Roses, and they were going to have Guns N' Roses do like the Queen thing for this movie, according to the trivia. And Axl Rose apparently didn't like Mario Van Peebles and wouldn't have anything to do with it. I don't know how true that is. I think it's more that just Axl Rose would just be like, I don't want to do this because I'm Axl Rose and I don't like doing anything. More than it was that he didn't like Mario Van Peebles. I think that was probably a joke that somebody put in there.
It could very well be. It could very well be. I mean, like I am intrigued by it. I don't know, Craig. Should we go all kind of Woodward and Bernstein and try and find out this ancient feud between Axl Rose and Mario Van Peebles and where it comes from?
I do know there's the band. There's a punk rock band called Against Me. If you've listened to them or not,
yeah, I have. Yeah.
They have an album called Reinventing Axl Rose, and apparently, so it might not be far-fetched because apparently their thing was they made if I remember correctly, they made the title and it was just supposed to be like a joke or something, and then Axl Rose got so upset about that he made voodoo dolls of the band, is what they heard. Like,
okay,
so,
yeah, right. Yeah. That tracked.
I feel.
I mean, I'm trying to think of like what Mario Van Peebles' career would have been that would have like put him with Axl Rose. I mean, I guess anything could have happened, right? I mean, anything, at any point, they could have just been in LA together at the same time and run into each other. So who knows if that's possible, right? If that's what it was. Axl Rose, he was the king of grudges and all kinds of weird stuff. It's like reading about that stuff that he did with the band where he was like making them sign over the rights to the name Guns N' Roses and all of that. I mean, he's a trip. So it's like as believable as it isn't believable, right? That and IMDb trivia, you just never know what you're getting there with that. But I could see Mario Van Peebles doing something to annoy him though, like maybe not even meaning to. You never know.
But they're just
I get it. I mean, because Axl Rose is kind of like a weird dude, but like it's like you say, I'm not even sure where their paths would necessarily cross. I know like it's one of those things that like kind of like Hollywood's like a smaller town than you think it is, and like people cross paths all the time, but I don't know, maybe. Yeah, Axl Rose, the person who hates New Jack City the most, apparently. He was so offended by that film for some reason. He just really didn't like it. He thought it was the worst film he ever saw. That was him. He was like, "Who is this guy who directed this film and starred in it? I hate this guy."
Well, it says here that they didn't like each other in real life. So actually, it sounds like I just kind of looked it up.
It was a mutual thing. It was a mutual thing. Yeah, okay.
Right. It sounds like it was something so it sounds like this is so that's part of the reason why we get Dr. Feelgood as the instrumental at the end of the movie, because they were going to use a Guns N' Roses song for that end fight, and yeah, Axl Rose was like, yeah, they got to fire. So it sounds like it wasn't even just like there's something about the two of them that they didn't get along for whatever reason. Who knows? They may have met in a nightclub in L.A. in the late '80s, early '90s, and there were issues. I don't know.
Well, I mean, like, yeah, you never know with these things, like, because, like, I imagine that Mario Van Peebles probably has quite a big ego as well, and when two people with big egos meet, sometimes it goes very badly. It's funny how you mentioned Dr. Feelgood there. That kind of almost took me out of the movie for a second, because like it's just like you just get the score, you just get like a kind of rocky score that's going on during the fight, and then suddenly you get the guitar riff from Dr. Feelgood, and I was like, what? Where'd that come from? Like,
Right.
I wasn't even sure, because at first I was like, because they do like a slightly different mix on it, and they've added, different music on top. So at first I was like, is that the guitar riff from Dr. Feelgood? And then I was like, oh, yeah, it is. Like, I was like, and then I looked in the credits, and I was like, I can't see Motley Crue like in the credits or whatever, but like, I'm sure that is the guitar riff from Dr. Feelgood. I mean,
that is, yeah. It definitely is. I don't know why it's not in the credits. I don't know. Because now you mentioned it, I missed too that they should have put the instrumental to Dr. Feelgood in the credits, because that was definitely it.
Yeah.
Maybe it was one of those things where it was it where it's like it's remixed enough that they were able to kind of get away. I don't know all the right versions of it, but I know.
All right. Yeah, no, I know what you mean. That just reminds me of that, like, that Vanilla Ice video where you see him interviewed, where he plays like a clip from Under Pressure, and then they play a clip from Ice Ice Baby, and he goes, "Look, it's just a little bitty different."
Like, get the ching. It's not the same thing, right?
Not the same. We put our own thing on it. You're like, yeah, Ice, whatever.
Right. It's kind of a funny thing, because it's like he was like so young at that time. It's funny because you think about nowadays, it would be so different. But I don't know how different actually, but it was like everybody that was involved with Vanilla Ice, they were just like, you go out there and settle it and clear this up for everybody. You go out and answer all the questions, Vanilla Ice. When they were the ones who put the song in, and he was just like, okay, all right, I guess I'll answer the questions of the thing. And so, that of course he's like wearing that for the rest of his life. That he said it's that it's not the same song. And it's like it was the same song. They knew it was the same song. Yeah,
they very much did. They very much did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'm kind of giving away when we recorded this. But like, yeah, not in April. But yeah, I saw like all the fun happenings in the States for New Year's, and like it is sometimes living in some sort of alternate cartoon timeline where you're like, what is going on? But yeah, Vanilla Ice played at Trump's New Year's party with a Ninja Turtle. And then I saw a bunch of Trump supporters got very upset because Green Day changed the lyrics to American Idiot. And apparently a bunch of really right-wing people suddenly realized that Green Day are quite liberal, despite the fact that it was quite obvious for, let me think, 30 years.
It's like when somebody said that about Rage Against the Machine. They were like, "Oh, it's such a shame that Rage Against the Machine's gotten political." And Tom Morello was like, "Have you listened to us for the last 30 years or so? Like, do you know what our music was about all that time?" But because you used to see like MAGA rallies, you'd see people like dancing with the MAGA flag to Rage Against the Machine songs, and people would be posting the video saying, "Do they know what the lyrics are? Do they know what this band's about? Like, do they understand what they're dancing to?" And it turned out, no, they didn't. They had no idea that those songs were political or political in their, like whatever.
Yeah.
It would have been okay if they were saying like, Biden was horrible or something. But the fact that it was left wing political means. Why do you have to get all political? But yeah, raging it's kind of the same thing. It's just like, yeah, people suddenly realizing when we recognized all along. It was like, it's kind of a funny thing.
It's a hilarious thing, but I guess like people misinterpreting songs has been around with us for like a long time. It's like even if you go back to like Republicans in the 80s, like, you know, Reagan tried, you know, used like Born in the USA in one of his rallies, and it's like, you clearly haven't listened to the lyrics of that song. That is, you just listened to the chorus. You've just heard the chorus, and you think it's like this flag waving. Like, no, that's not what the song's about.
Yeah,
But anyway, Craig, you're always good at getting us out of a hole in a tangent. Tell us more about Highlander 3.
Oh, Highlander 3. That makes them special, I think one of the things we forgot to mention as we move forward, because there's very little plot in terms of like Alex is kind of interviewing Nash, aka McLeod, but Kane has illusion abilities, and so that's like the big what makes him so devious and yeah, supposed to be the worst villain yet.
Yes.
What do we think?
With the, I mean, like, again, like, it's hard to judge because with the illusion abilities, we get this like CGI, and it's hard for me to like place myself back as like being whatever I be at that time, 94, I'd be like 9 years old, to kind of remember. But I do feel like the special effects in the movie were a bit ropey even for 94. Am I being harsh in that? Or like, I don't think some of the effects I think are quite good, but some of them are pretty rubbish.
Yeah, I think, I think the car scenes and the thing that I didn't understand about his illusion abilities was like, was he making things appear and then disappear, or was he actually making like tangible things? Like there's a scene where he steals there's the guys doing the 3-card Monty, which I have to say it's one of the more fascinating things for me living in Philadelphia to actually see real 3-card Monty being done on the streets, and like wishing that I had Mario Van Peebles' ability to make all the cards one and just, I don't know if I would have make it out alive if I tried to rip them off like that. But anyway, but he somehow is able to take the guy's sunglasses, and that doesn't seem to be illusion ability. That seems to be the ability to make them disappear off one guy's head and put them on another. So there's like things that he can do that I don't even quite understand, like how he's able to do them.
Yeah, no, that I had the same issue because especially our scene again, it's the same as the car scene with the Kurgan in the first one, but now it has McLeod's adopted son, and it also it's like they're trying to make it again crank it up to 11, and the fact that the car's on fire at one point and he just rips the steering wheel off as he's laughing maniacally apparently. But yeah, there's like a plane coming and the plane disappears, or there's trucks coming at them and the trucks disappear and there's semis, and that's one of those things where I agree with you, Matt, that I didn't know, like, are those all illusions, or is he making them disappear before they hit the car or something? Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about that either. I thought that, in my thinking, I thought those things were real, but he was making them disappear as they went through them. But maybe it's the reverse. Maybe they are actually like illusions, and they're just going through them. But then it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But like, I guess like a lot of the things in the movie don't make a lot of sense to me. But yes, sorry.
This is things that okay, it's already a movie about immortals that have to chop each other's heads off in order to be the last one to get all of them. So I'm going to take this all with a grain of salt, but adding the magic element, I was like, it feels like too much now. Like it's like
Yeah,
before
I know what you mean. I think it's
around.
like the I think that I suddenly can't remember the name of it. What is the name of the fourth Indiana Jones film?
Oh, Crystal Skulls.
Crystal Skulls, Kingdom of Crystal Skull. Right. So I think it's like the thing with the Kingdom of Crystal Skull. Yes, a lot of wacky things go on in Indiana Jones films. Yes, they are fantastical, but they are generally based on kind of earthbound myths and bringing like a science fiction element to Kingdom of Crystal Skull seems a bit much, even though I can accept that like lots of wacky things go on in this world and it's not like our world. And I kind of feel like that's kind of the same thing going on here. That was, but this point would have been much more succinct if I hadn't suddenly forgotten the name of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
No, you know what? The other thing I think too is that the whole time we've been doing this, we've been talking about how much this movie is taking from the first movie.
Sure.
And I wonder if the magic element was their way of saying it's not the first movie, right? It's Vanilla Ice, right? This is the Ching, right? The magic is the Ching piece, right? That makes it so it's not under pressure. That's why they put the magic into it. And I kind of like agree with both of you that it's an element that we didn't need, but they felt we needed it because one, they didn't want to be too much like the first movie. And two, I think it gave them an opportunity to show off this fancy new CGI technology that they had.
Yeah. I think like because now I don't actually I don't actually edit the podcast. Another podcast, Petros, from Caged In and Getting to For You. He's been editing the podcast for a little while, and if he's still editing the podcast at this stage, I think we should try and get him to edit in like that Vanilla Ice going just a little bit different. that would be great. So, Petros, if you could do that, that'd be amazing. But otherwise, the episode will just continue as normal for the listeners. So, there's not a whole lot more to talk about in this movie, but I do want to talk about a couple of things. We did trail talking about the sex scene, so I guess we're going to talk about that. And after we talk about the sex scene, we're going to talk a little bit about things we liked in the movie. So first, the sex scene between Alex and Connor, which is like, this is one of those kind of hilarious sex scenes. It's not like peak hilarious. It's not like Elizabeth Berkley and Kyle Macklin in Showgirls hilarious. That's obviously the greatest bad sex scene in cinema history. But it is fun because like it is the type of sex that looks like the people know that they're being filmed. That happens. It's very kind of arched back. It's very kind of hair floating. It's very it's very kind of a music video. I guess like in the tradition, the great Highlander tradition of everything feeling like a music video. I guess it's like that as well. But what did you guys think of this one?
I will say we technically have two sex scenes in this movie.
Yeah, I know we do have two sex scenes in the movie, but I mean like the longer sequence with Connor and Alex that does feel like a music video all of itself.
And it's surprisingly, it goes on longer than I thought it would. I did feel like we were getting to there's a point in watching it where I was like, this where I am even like sitting there thinking this is going on for a bit. Like okay, so they're now like switching positions. They're like doing okay.
I think as well they like pad out, they like loop some of the footage. We definitely get some of the same footage twice.
Yeah, but then it's like the same footage, but then once with her bra, once without her bra. I think they do that, and it's intense. I mean, I remember the first one, and it's obviously playing the queen who wants to live forever.
Mm-hmm.
Where this one it has more of a rock edge to it, and they're like trying to make it. I don't know if they're trying to make it not moving away or moving towards like sexy and rough, away from like the sensual, whatever the first version was. I can't believe I'm sitting here deconstructing the Highlander sex scene between each one, but yes.
Matt?
Yeah, I think it's one of the more fascinating things. The scene with Alex, right? That's the modern one, as opposed to the one that they have in the barn, where they're kind of just rolling a roll in the hay, right? A literal roll in the hay that they have. This extended one, it's fascinating because there's only like maybe like 20 minutes left of the movie. And we've got the extended montage scene of him building the sword, right? He's constructing the new sword to fight. So we've got that big montage. And then we've got this long sex scene. And it's almost like it's a really weird thing, I think, for a modern movie watcher, because we're so used to long endings now, right? It's like in a Marvel movie, the ending is like 45 minutes, and it's like, oh, the heroes almost win, now the heroes almost lose, and all hope is lost, and how are they going to get it back together? And then they win, and okay, now let's do the ending piece and set up the next movie and all this other stuff. To be like at 20 minutes, it's almost like one of those deals where like you're getting a ride to the airport and you're like, oh, we're going to make it on time? Are we going to get there? And then, he's just sort of parking and getting gas or something like that. And then luckily you do get there on time. But I always kind of had that feeling of like, are we going to have enough time for an ending here with all this other stuff that we're doing? So that was a real fascinating thing that not only was it an extended sex scene, not only was it looped, but it was also coming at a time when we didn't have a lot of movie left after this.
Well, and for this one, I mean, I know, again, with these movies, you can have these relationships build almost instantly, but it feels out of nowhere. Like he goes to Scotland, and then she follows him. You're like, oh, you kind of met the one time, basically. It feels out of nowhere in the terms of like she just looks like somebody he used to love, and then she's kind of fascinated with him, but they don't build their relationship doesn't build in the same way that it does in the first movie, I guess.
Yeah, there's no kind of natural progression there. And she kind of takes everything in her stride, because when she comes to Scotland and kind of reels off his biography of like, oh, you were born here, and you were part of the clan on the banks of the Loch Shiel and all this kind of stuff. She seems relatively unperturbed by it. I mean, I guess like the opposite of that, where people like are not convinced to a ridiculous degree for most of the movie, and are eventually convinced by some thing they read in a book or whatever, where they get the clues together. So sometimes it can take too long, and that's a bit of a kind of tired cliche. But at the same time, she kind of took it too well, I think. The whole kind of like, oh, he's an immortal, I guess.
Yeah, it's almost like, again, this whole thing at the beginning of the movie where we're supposed to sort of gather these Chekhov's elements up and put them in our bag, right? Because we get this element at the beginning where she's completely fine with the idea that there is a magician in ancient Japan or feudal Japan who could do all of these things. That like she completely believed that Nakano existed, and that he was doing all this magic that like the folklore was describing of him. So I guess there's this idea that she already believes that magic exists. So like, why not have a guy be immortal? It's a little bit of a stretches credulity a bit, but it's one of those deals where it was like, oh yeah, that was something we put in our bag at the beginning of the movie, and we're pulling it out now to show you. So yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, because like there is a hint of that, because like there is a random scene where she is being interviewed on TV, and it seems like it's kind of portrayed that she's somewhat of a controversial archaeologist, because she believes that like myths can help you discover archaeological sites. I guess like they do set up a little bit. It's a bit random and throwaway, but yeah, I guess they do set it up a little bit.
Yeah, and it's in a world apparently where everybody's watching this channel.
Oh yeah, everybody watching the same channel. And in 1994, there was only one local New York station that everybody watched at the same time. It was a very big news program in 1994, and we can't counter it because none of us lived in New York, so none of us really know. It was very popular.
Right. Well, just the idea is, so I confess here, I was an anthropology major in college, and of course, I had to take archaeology classes, and it does always blow my mind. Another movie that's similar is, or another movie that has an archaeologist in it is the Minion. But the idea of these archaeologists, not like the Indiana Jones archaeologists, but these sort of professorial archaeologists who have a ton of money, right? That live this sort of lavish lifestyle, that are famous, that are all over the news and everything. Because I can't even off the top of my head think of the archaeologists that I had to learn about when I was, an undergrad 20 years ago. But that idea that, like, you've got famous archaeologists that are out there, like, on TV and doing all this kind of stuff, when really it's sort of like, oh yeah, we just were digging up the ground for the highway. We found some stuff, and yet we'll interview this person from the local university for 5 minutes and then be done with it. It's out. The idea of famous archaeologists like that is always fascinating for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, because I mean, I could not name an archaeologist. I mean, like, in terms of like famous archaeologists, I couldn't name a famous archaeologist. I could name famous, I don't know, psychologists. I could name famous philosophers. I could name even some famous anthropologists that I'm aware of. But I couldn't name any. I don't know. Even despite the fact that actually, when I was younger, before I wanted to be a journalist, I wanted to be an archaeologist. Partly because of Indiana Jones, but also partly because of a show that was popular in the UK, hosted by Tony Robinson, called Time Team. So any UK listeners might remember Time Team. It was a good show. It was based on archaeological digs. But anyway, cutting back to Highlander 3, I'll try and get us out the tangent this time because I created it, so therefore it's my mess. I should clean it up. So we now are going to talk about things we like about Highlander 3, and I'm going to kick it off with something I like. I particularly like, despite the fact it kind of makes no sense because they're fighting on holy ground, the first fight between Kane and Lambert. I think one of the things this movie suffers from is a lot of the action sequences, whether it's the first one with Nakano and Kane, or the fight between Connor McLeod and Kane's goon, because Kane ends up with only having one goon because he kills the other one for shits and giggles. And like they're all kind of short. They're all a little bit too short. Like there's the magic involved, and it's kind of like 2 moves and you're done kind of thing. And so they feel kind of a little bit unsatisfactory. Whereas I think like the 2 main fights between Connor and Kane are the most satisfying action sequences in the movie. And I think the first fight, I think it is even more fun, particularly because you get like this really kind of wacky, quite eccentric move where they're like fighting on like kind of basically like trapezes, sword fighting, and like even though it's kind of silly, it's also kind of awesome. And so like that is one thing that really worked for me in the movie. I really enjoyed that fight sequence. I think it's a genuinely excellent action sequence.
Okay. No, great. I actually, yes, I like their first fight between them better. I would agree that, I don't know, I think all the fight sequences in general go too fast, in my opinion. So
yeah, that's what I would agree. I would agree with that. But I think that's why that first fight in the Buddhist shrine, which actually has like a little bit of time to breathe, works the best.
Yes. And I feel like this is the running theme of a lot of our episodes where there's a lot of potential. I feel like in some of the flashbacks where where you're kind of sitting there, and if he stayed, if there was a longer section of him stuck in kind of the psychiatric ward where he has time to do flashbacks more, where it's like you really could see what all happened during the French Revolution, or what all happened during when he was getting trained in Japan. Like if they let that breathe more, I feel like, I don't know, there was a lot of potential, I guess, overall. And I think in a way to make it expand it, obviously, or continue on from the original movie, despite the fact that the original movie, as we've talked about many times, has a very concrete ending. They were able to make it work, I guess, the best they could.
Yeah. I agree
but
with you there, like in terms of like the expanding things out. Like I think, like you say, there's a lot of different potential avenues we've discussed before, the thing about Nakano, but also, like you say, the stuff with the French Revolution, that could have been interesting to extend that out. And there's like kind of interesting plot points that are just kind of thrown away. Like at one point, Connor is going to be executed in revolutionary France, and he has like it seems like another immortal friend who seems like kind of suicidal. Like he wants to be swapped out with him, you know, to be executed, because he seems to be fed up with like the immortal life. And like that could have been interesting, like explore that character more, and in his relationship with that character. But yeah, it's not done. It's basically the characters in like two scenes, and then we're out and we never see him again or talk about him again ever.
because that links almost to the again, the first one, where McLeod has a friend that he meets up with, but the friend in 85 or whatever, but the friend then is killed by the Kurgan.
Yeah.
Where yes, it seems like, as you were saying, that I feel like they could have expanded that element, or you could even see him. Maybe it was a budgetary thing or whatever, but fighting in the French Revolution or something. I don't know. The whole time I was sitting there, I just wanted more, which I guess is better than kind of being like, okay, get this crap off. Turn it off.
That is very true. That is very true. It's better to watch a film that is very flawed and could be a more interesting film if they had just fleshed out things rather than just being like, God, how much has it got left? But I do feel like we've ended up talking about the flaws again. So like, Matt, what was it like? Other than my thing, I mean, you can agree with my thing as well, like the first fight or whatever. But anything else that kind of stood out to you? You were like, actually, this was done really well, and I enjoyed this, and it was, you know, it wasn't just like I enjoyed it. Ironically, like some of the things we might have like the sex scene or whatever, but like I proper enjoyed this. I can say that this was something they did really well.
Yeah, I mean, I just overall I love the concept that this movie is a do-over. That it was
Yep.
like we're gonna do a different version of part two, and so that concept is just goofy, but I really appreciate that. But really, like, legitimately liked. I loved this the stuff in the Scottish Highlands. You know, the Lorena McKennitt. You know, her singing, the montages, and sort of the you know, him practicing, but also even just sort of getting in touch with his homeland, and like using that as the power that he needs to fight Kane. I thought that was all done really well. It was like really kind of it was a very emotional, like, human moment in this film that, for the most part, like what we've just been talking about, right? Like, oh, we've got these flashback scenes, and they, you know, I mean, essentially, like you said, it was really great that we have this character that wanted to kill himself, but essentially by not really delving into him, it was just like, let's rip off the end of Tale of Two Cities, right? Like that's really all they were doing with that scene when they could have added more. So the fact that as we were getting towards the end of the movie and we really needed to get to the end, we felt like the fact that they took all that time to really do those montages and have him getting in touch with his homeland and coming back there and all of that, I thought that was all really nice, and that was really well done.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. I enjoyed those sequences too. I think that was good, and like the montage. I think that was one of the sequences that worked best, and like I think the sword making montage is pretty good, and like he keeps failing and he keeps failing, and then Alex brings the piece that he needs, and and he finally can make the sword. I think yeah, I think that was a nice payoff, and I think those scenes kind of stood out in the movie for sure, for sure. And then I don't know, I feel like the first fight kind of eclipses the final battle. I don't what did you make of the final battle that we have in the gasworks?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that. The only thing about that first fight is the trapeze thing just seemed goofy. Like it was just so they're just kind of swinging back and forth and swinging at each other, and I was like, who's going to who's going to cut the person's cord first? And finally, Kane cuts it. But before that, when they're going back and forth, it is a really great fight scene, and it worked really well. And I think you're right that the second fight, it was. I don't know. It was like there's so much about the magic stuff, right? That was just they had to keep playing up the magic thing. But also, too, I almost feel like because they put so much into that element of him going back to the Highlands and sort of getting in touch with his past, and then also building the new sword and all of that kind of stuff that goes on there. It's almost like when you watch a movie where the hero is weak earlier in the film and then does whatever they need to do to become stronger. It was almost like it was hard for them to not have him just take down Kane easily, because it was like he now had gained all this power and the new sword and all of that. And so it was almost like you said, they did a better fight the first time, but also the way they almost wrote themselves into a corner with the second fight, because it would have been hard, maybe. I don't know. I mean, not that we would we have really been like, oh, why is he having so much trouble? I thought he got all his power back being in his home. We would have been okay with him struggling if it was a really tough fight scene. So maybe that's just me. Maybe it's just like they ran out of money and they just kind of had to kind of go with it and just kind of get it done.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, no, I agree. I agree with both of you. I think because there even gets to be the point where he chops Kane in half, and then Kane is laughing, his legs are still standing. He's like, and it just because of the magic, it becomes very goofy, even more than the trapeze stuff. And no, I feel like I don't know why they even had to. There's the part of me like, why they have to go back to New York? But I know they threw in the plot point of having the son getting kidnapped, which was pointless. But it's like Kane found McLeod in Scotland or something I don't know. There's a lot of stuff like that where, but I get the idea of, in a factory, it's supposed to look cool, but I don't know. I was just kind of very underwhelmed by that final fight.
Yeah, well, right, and that was a Toronto that was doubling for Jersey City, New Jersey. Which one interesting fact about Jersey City now? I live a little, obviously, in Philadelphia. I'm south of there, but at the time, Jersey City was a very kind of rough industrial area. It is now completely gentrified. It's like the New York metro area has kind of got in there, so you can go to Jersey City, probably get maybe your best gourmet hamburger, gourmet tacos, all that kind of stuff. It's a much fancier place now. I think Connor would actually be at home there. He'd find a lot of nice fancy places to eat there. So
very good, very good. Yes, I do feel like we have a lot of things pretending to be other things, because I know that some of the New York scenes and some of the Japan scenes were filmed in Montreal. So yeah, we got a lot of Canada just pretending to be things. But I do feel like that is very typical Hollywood. I feel like lots of Canadian cities have been made to look like other American cities, because apparently it's much cheaper to film in Canada than in main big American cities.
Well, and that's what happens, especially during that time. That's when you have the big boom of television during the 90s, all being shot in Canada, especially the Highlander series was shot in Canada.
That's right.
But when Vancouver became known kind of basically as Hollywood North, it was like any series or basically any sci-fi related show was then
Yeah.
shot in Columbia, so on X-Files and so on.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
because the thing with X-Files, right, is that at the end of the series run, David Duchovny, trying to build his Hollywood career, he made them move the production to LA, which was prohibitively much more expensive. But that was like one of his demands if he was going to keep doing the show, was that they film it in LA. So that was so that kind of dovetails with that. And of course, Highlander, right? They took it. That show took place in Seacouver, right? It was a mix of Seattle and Vancouver.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. I think that like we've I mean, I guess like that was a decent tangent because we brought it back at least to Highlander the TV series, so it's okay. It's okay. It's all part of the same franchise, people. The franchise that makes no sense, nothing adds up. Nothing seems to connect. The TV series connects a little bit with the films. The cartoon series doesn't is completely different and it's its own thing. Each film doesn't really connect, but a lot of it's bad. A lot of it's bad, but for some reason, it's a fun franchise, and even these bad sequels, like, because I had no idea. Like when I watched this movie and then I put it in my letterbox, I didn't know what to rate it. I put it as 2 stars, but also like I don't know, maybe I'll go back and put a heart next to it as well because also it's kind of fun as well, even though it's a bad movie. Kind of the same with even Highlander 2. Michael Ironside is chewing the fuck out of the scenery. It's like I don't know. Like there's things to enjoy about. I mean, there's maybe not things to enjoy about Endgame, but like most of it. Like
Well,
most of
Endgame,
it.
I love Bruce Payne in Endgame.
Yeah, sure, okay.
Yeah, I love, and I also love again that we have a third sequel, right? Because we have a third part too in Endgame because but Endgame's not a do-over, right? Because the Highlander series is essentially like we talked about. It's a different timeline where the Kurgan Connor still kills the Kurgan, but he's not the only one, right? That's not the end when he kills the Kurgan, and everything just kind of continues from there. But also the other thing with Endgame, right, is I guess they decided that Christopher Lambert's vision problems were such that they had to write him out of the rest of the series and have Duncan take over. So yeah, but it's kind of funny when we think of like the whole multiverse of madness. Like they could have done a multiverse of madness of Highlander, right? That you could just like do something that would like maybe like some mystical immortal just brings everybody together, and it's this whole extravaganza of all these different timelines, putting them together.
Yeah. Okay. We could get like yeah. I definitely think if you want to do like some sort of Highlander multiverse of madness, I definitely think the best person to do that would be former Doctor Who showrunner and co-creator of the 2010 Sherlock, Stephen Moffat, because he knows how to really twist things.
And I know, so after Endgame, Endgame was supposed to like officially close out, I think everything. Well, Lambert,
Yes.
and then close out the series, but then they made The Source, which was another, which then they brought they brought on like a sorcerer that was another official close out the series or something of the.
Yes, that's the two things I've not seen. So I've not seen The Source, and there was an anime that they did sometime in the 2010s, and I've also not seen that. That's the two things.
Right.
But I've seen most of the stuff.
Show. Right. That's the Mythos show, I think.
Yeah.
I will say what is funny about this whole episode and talking about this movie and the movie itself, is that there's almost more care, and we've spent more time talking about the sex scene than any of the fights, which is what is supposed to be about, these immortals fighting. It's like, oh no, the sex scene was kind of weirdly the thing they put most emphasis on.
Right.
Yeah, that is kind of odd. I mean, like, because it's like a centerpiece part of the film in the way that other than the first Kane versus Connor fight, really the fights are very short. They're you know, people are quickly defeated, and yeah, I I mean, I guess like you could have got round it if you'd maybe given Kane more goons or what, you know, so there could have been a few more fights or even, you know, him getting into trouble with people on the streets. You know, he could have had like a bit of a fight with the, you know, Latino gang, but like again, that just ends in 2 seconds. He like punches like a couple of guys and then he just immediately gets shot. So like again, there was like maybe 6 guys there. He could have taken out those 6 guys. He's an immortal, you know, like he's badass, you know. He could have made a fight sequence there. You know, there's a bunch of opportunities you could have had for like better, longer fight sequences, but they just didn't take it.
Yeah, that idea to kill one of the two, have Kane kill one of his own goons off, which the reason why that doesn't make any sense to me, right? Why he kills one of his own goons is that he sends the other one to go fight Connor McLeod, right? To go kill Connor McLeod. And it doesn't make any sense that like if the idea was he needed to kill one of his goons so he could get the quickening and get some power like suddenly because he's been, you know, on ice for 400 years or he's been, you know, stuck there for 400 years, wouldn't his goon also be in a similar weakened state? And why would he think that the goon, and so then Connor's just going to get the power from the goon when he beheads him. So they should have just had that second goon there so that, you know, because that actually could have been a fun fight scene, the two goons fighting him at the same time.
Yeah, that could have worked. Yeah, for sure. I definitely think that would have been better. Again, I do feel like it's a bit like the burning the village scene. It's like that thing of, and this is not the only action movie to fall into this trap, but that thing of like, we have to prove how capital letters evil this villain is. So, like, the most evil thing a villain can do is like kill off one of his own gang. Like I've, you know, there's a bunch of movies we covered. I mean, like last year we covered Judgment Night, and that happens there. And there's some that I feel like there's other movies we've done that like this happens, and again, it's just to prove like just how bad, just how rotten to the core that our villain is. But like, I do think in this case, because he has only got 2 goons, it really weakens potential fight sequences. Yeah.
Well, no, and I agree in the sense that because then he kills them so quickly after they get out of their tomb that then you're kind of sitting there going, well, then why didn't you just kill them when you were imprisoned for the 400 years or whatever?
He needed the company, right? 400 years you get bored. That's what, yeah. He needed the company. Because that's the one thing. I mean, we have so many of these movies talk about these people being like trapped for like these large amounts of time. Like, I mean, what is Black Adam that he's like trapped for like 5,000 years, which I can't even imagine like the insanity, right? That would come with that. So I guess in this case, it kind of keeps them a little bit sane that they've got people that they can talk to for 400 years, but still being stuck anywhere for 400 years, like that's just, I imagine you've got to learn a lot of yoga, meditation, things like that to be able to get through that.
Yeah. Play a lot of card games. They've learned every card game. Every card game ever invented up until the 1500s or whatever. So like, but I think that's about it. I think like that is Highlander 3, the Sorcerer, or the Final Dimension, depending where in the world you're watching this film. That's it. So it just leaves me to ask everybody here their social media details and anything they want to plug, promote, talk about, or even if they want to give any other final thoughts on the movie. So, Matt, tell us where you're at social media wise. Tell us all about your podcast, where people can find your podcast. You can talk about your books. You can talk about anything under the sun that you want to promote that has your name attached to it.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, yeah, dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. That's the main site. That's where you can find links for everything. So the social media links are there. I'm on Twitter, Facebook. So Twitter is DTV Connoisseur. Facebook is Direct to Video Connoisseur. And then it's DTV Connoisseur on Instagram as well. So you can find everything there. Links to my novels. My newest novel is Don's House in the Mountains. That's, you can find that on my site. Also, my author page is MatthewPoirierAuthor.com. But yeah, Don's House in the Mountains is available. Also, Bainbridge was a short action novel that I did, kind of a send up to early 90s action. That's also available there. My other novels, Chad and Accounting, Girl in the Gun, and Holtman Arms, they're all there. And then, yeah, the podcast, usually new episodes come every Tuesday night, Eastern time, US. I go weekly. One of the things by the time this post, or at the point that this is uploaded or live, I should be going weekly with no more of the solo episodes. So right now, currently, I do like a solo episode every other week and then have a guest on the weeks of those other weeks. I'm going to try to be guest every week, but we'll see how that goes. But that's kind of the plan. So hopefully when you're listening to this, it'll be guests every week, but every once in a while I'll be solo as well, and just kind of talking about different things. But direct to video movies, that's probably the bulk of what we talk about on the podcast. And that's the DTVC podcast, which you can find on all your major podcatchers.
Excellent. I recommend everybody check out all of those things and maybe buy one of Matt's books.
Yes.
If you're so inclined. And Craig, tell us all your social media details. Tell us anything you want to promote. Remember, this episode goes out in April, just in case.
Yep. So you can find me on Instagram or like YouTube or any of those, Twitter at Guilty Animals is the one that I've been using, even though I probably haven't used as much as I should. But the thing that I've been working on for a long time, which is the comedy special dissection thing, it actually will be going up. So if this comes out in April, the show officially opens in May. I've been doing the workshops now for several months, as I'm talking like I'm in the future, in front of different groups. And yeah, it's as I've talked about before, it's a comedy special that is about offensiveness and live comedy and how we communicate around it and things like that. And the irony is, as right before I joined on for this episode, I read all the stuff about Dave Chappelle and Ricky Gervais doing their specials. But yeah, besides that, I also have the other podcast that we do very rarely, called Bloodhound Picks, which is just horror focused, but mainly looking at just obscure horror cinema, or talking with independent kind of artists about the horror community and things like how they make their movies and things like that. And that's Bloodhound Picks, PIX.
Excellent. Well, we've talked about it for a while. You've talked about it for a while. Your comedy special, obviously, we'll be bigging it up here at the podcast, promoting the hell out of it. People, if you're in the Michigan area, go see it. And then like watch it when it if you're elsewhere, watch it when it hits like YouTube or whatever. Definitely check it out. We'll definitely be bigging it up for you, Craig. And so yes, sorry, Craig.
No, I just said thank you. Yeah.
No, it's no problem.
So it's stand up and it's storytelling, and all of that combined is this discussion, yes, around offensiveness.
Excellent. So it just leaves me to promote this podcast. Actually, if you want to check out more of my things, I have. Well, this is in April, so like I've some time ago. When I'm recording this, I have recently started a Substack, but I guess by the time it's April, I'll have started a Substack like 4 or 5 months ago. So like I have started a Substack, which you can follow at Substack. It's called Notes from the Musical Underground. I'm covering kind of below the radar musical artists that I've not really heard of, or that I'm vaguely aware of, trying to find new things, and hopefully you can discover new things with me as I go on this journey. But for this podcast, you can follow us. Currently, you can follow us on X/Twitter. By the time this goes out, I don't know if that website will have imploded. We just don't know. It's a day-by-day thing, so it might still exist. We might come up with a Blue Sky. Who knows? We do also have a Facebook, so you can follow us there too. In terms of where you can listen to this podcast, you can listen to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a bunch of other podcast providers. No longer Stitcher, because Stitcher is dead, and I keep forgetting it's dead. So I keep wanting to say Stitcher.
Right.
It doesn't exist anymore. So you can't listen to us there. But you can also listen to us on the Last of the Action Heroes podcast network, which is a network of shows. It's a bunch of great action shows. If you're an action fan, you should definitely check out the Last of the Action Heroes podcast network. There's podcasts covering Sylvester Stallone, the Rocky movies, the Rambo movies, Bruce Willis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Dolph Lundgren, and a bunch of other stuff. Loads of podcasts. If you're an action fan, it's a cornucopia of great action content, and you should be listening to a bunch of it, hopefully along with this show. So that is that. But that closes out this one. We will return again next month, where I believe we're talking about the 1994 Jean-Claude Van Damme box office disaster that was Street Fighter. But until then, we will see you.